Welcome back to the BAT podcast. I'm here with a very special guest this week, and that's Miles Collier. Miles is a man of many talents, but really one of the biggest supporters of the car collecting hobby today, and someone who's been a huge contributor to all kinds of historic car activities and conservation efforts, which I'm excited to hear more about today from him, including his most recent endeavor, which is a superb new book called The Archaeological Automobile. So Miles, thank you so much for being here. I know our community will absolutely love to hear your insights today.
Well, thank you so much, Howard, for inviting me onto the BAT podcast. It's a pleasure to be there.
Fantastic. You know, one thing I really appreciate about you, and which I think is important for people to understand, is that you have always taken a very thoughtful and really academic approach to understanding historic cars and, contextualizing what collecting and preservation means in really interesting ways. So for those that may not know you or about your extensive background with automobiles, it'd be great if you could give us an overview of kind of your involvement with cars and collecting over the years and kind of what you've been up to.
Okay. I'd kick that off by basically saying it's probably all genetic. My paternal grandmother was a car enthusiast, literally back in the 1900s. And my father and my Uncle Sam were international sports car racers in the pre-World War II era, competing at the Tourist Trophy in Ireland, at Le Mans in France, the Alpine Rally. They ran the Alpine Rally with a V12 Auburn Speedster that went under the rather frightful name of Mephistopheles. And then, of course, they were involved in the start of road racing, sports car road racing in the United States, under the rubric of the ARCA, the Automobile Racing Club of America. For myself, I was a SCCA racer in the 60s and 70s, and then subsequently a vintage racer in the 80s and 90s. And during college, I had a weekend and summer job as a foreign car mechanic, literally screwing on people's Volkswagens. I started collecting cars, Porsches initially in 1976. And I started with a 904 and a Carrera Abarth GTL. So, if you're going to get started in something, you might as well get started with good stuff. But actually, the rationale for that was those cars were cheap back then. They really were. And so you could actually, buy that kind of stuff. And then ultimately, I bought the Cunningham collection in 1986, opened the museum at Revs in Naples in 1990, developed the programming, and now for 20 years for an international symposium on collecting historical automobiles, and founded Revs, which is the name of my not-for-profit automotive endeavor, as an historical automobile research facility in the 2010s. So that's kind of the profile of my autophilia.
That's great. You were kind enough to invite me to join you at the 2019 symposium, which was a great experience. For those who don't know, you invite probably 60 or 70 of the top collectors in the world to attend what amounts to a 3 or 4 day program hosted at your museum with a variety of really awesome guests, guest speakers, that sort of thing. And to be honest with you, you invited me, and I was very my pleasure to accept. And the night before, I really was tossing and turning and could not sleep, because I said, what in God's name am I going to tell this group of 60 collectors that they don't already know? But at the time, it was a kind of a panel discussion about the changing auction world and industry, and how kind of the online model was shaking things up. And I have to say, it was great. It was really fantastic.
And as I recall, you were a star, Howard. So just what we expect from the Swig family.
Well, thank you for saying that. As it relates to this book, The Archaeological Automobile, which really covers kind of in many ways, kind of your lifetime of achievements and understanding everything it is you do about cars and restoration and collecting and all sorts of insights that underpin all that stuff. Can you give us kind of a quick overview before we really get into it today of kind of what is the, quote unquote, archaeological mindset, and what can readers expect from this book?
Okay, well, the archaeological mindset is basically a questing approach when dealing with automobiles, when dealing with the object. It's having an open mind to let the car tell you about itself. It's essentially reading the elements of patina, of wear and use, of repairs and modifications, and extracting from that the life story of the automobile, and then being respectful of that life story and trying to keep it alive in whatever future activities you have with that particular automobile.
At one point in the book, you say that archaeologists do not work on the past, they work on what remains of the past, which is an interesting take on the whole thing. So what are the implications of that when we apply it to kind of the world of historic cars and restoring them?
Well, I think that it basically means this: whatever exists now in whatever condition is all you have of any old car. It's the old story that authenticity is a fixed quantity in any car that you want to talk about. And we have no ability to increase authenticity, but we certainly have the ability to reduce it. So whatever you do to conserve, restore, or rebuild today is all you can have from the past. And that lump of matter contains all that you can know about that individual automobile. And that automobile is the foundation then of its new restored existence. And that foundation will never change as regards originality, completeness, and its archaeology. So as I say, you got what you got, and you want to be very, very careful about preserving everything that you have.
Yeah, very good. And every day on Bring a Trailer, we have these vibrant comment sections on each vehicle, and oftentimes that discussion shifts to, if it's a project car, how might one go about restoring it? If it's a hyper restored car, people want to weigh in on what went right, what went wrong, why did this person restore it in the first place? If there's a photo of it in 1992 and it looks pretty good as it sat then. I know that you have a lot of thoughts on restoration and the various ways in which one can approach that. I'd love if you could share your thoughts on what the kind of archaeological restoration consists of, and how that kind of sits with how other folks might approach such an undertaking.
Well, the archaeological restoration is one that sort of exists halfway between, let's say, a conservation project and a true restoration in the sense of what we think of showing up at Pebble Beach. It's essentially a restoration that tries to respect and celebrate the particularities, the peculiarities, the individuality of an old car that has deteriorated to the point that we actually do need to do some kind of a restoration on it. So what we want to do is, we don't want to hide the damages and the repairs from the past. What we want to do is incorporate the evidence of those kinds of events into the restoration itself. And the net result is you end up with a car that actually has character. So I guess one way to think about this is, if we do a normal and conventional, what I call an anonymizing restoration, we create an archetype. Okay, the archetype is basically the make and model of that car, reflecting all of its proper elements the way the factory and the designers intended. That's the archetype. It has no personality. It has no individuality. It doesn't really say anything about its travel through time. What I'm advocating is a restoration that is not archetypal, but is individualistic, that it's one that celebrates the fact that that automobile has been around for 10, 40, 100 years, and that it has seen and done things that are worthy of respect.
You know, you mentioned something at the symposium a few years ago, which I actually use every single week in my job at Bring a Trailer when evaluating all the cars that get submitted to us. And that is understanding the difference between preservation and decay. Obviously, you are someone that goes to great lengths to preserve, you know, as much originality as possible. So yeah, I'd love to know kind of if there are a few examples that come to mind of cars in the collection, either that you have kept as they are, or maybe some where you've done some, you know, thoughtful restoration work. You mentioned in your book your Alpha TZ and repainting the front nose while still keeping all the kind of patina and rock chips and that sort of thing. So anything you can share on that would be awesome.
Yeah, that TZ was a fairly crazed idea, because we were literally repainting the nose and preserving every sand chip that it had accumulated over 30 years of vintage racing in that same nose. And that was kind of a cute trick. You know, we just finished a Carrera 6 that we restored as of its race at the Nürburgring 1000 KMs in 1968. So the car had 2 years of wear and tear on it at the time that we decided that we would try and create a restoration that emulated its configuration. And the issue there is to preserve evidence of the car's use that was apparent from photographs from 1968 into its restoration. And as I say, not to create an archetype, which would be Carrera 6 as made by Porsche in 1966. Instead, this is a car that had a fair amount of water gone under the bridge, and our restoration incorporates that. So what did we do? The car had a number of off-course excursions, which is only normal with a racing car, and the aluminum side pods that with a Carrera 6, those are wet side pods. They actually have fuel in them. Had been raked by rocks or gravel or whatever as the car went off, so that these long linear grooves pounded into the bottom of the side pods. And so during the restoration, we didn't remove those. We essentially just painted over them and let them stay. So if you jack the car up today and look underneath, you're going to see that the bottom of the car shows off-course excursion damage. The same thing with respect to the kind of panel fits that are apparent. We had excellent photographs of the car from 1968, and they showed some serious misalignments in some of the fiberglass panels. Well, that's part of the character of this automobile, and so we left those be. Now, what will happen is what we've ended up with is a car that you can read the restoration with respect to some events from the car's life, but nevertheless, the car still has a fresh coat of paint on it. It's pretty shiny. And the approach to getting this car archaeologically right is it now needs to go out back to the track and needs to go get run for a bit. Needs to get rock chip, needs to get rubber marks on the paint, needs to get star cracks in the fiberglass from rocks, pebbles coming off the tires. Once that begins to get patinated again, this car is going to be really difficult to tell from the car the way it was in 1968. And that is an archaeological restoration.
You know, at first glance, some listeners may be thinking that this, kind of archaeological approach may be one that only kind of a small amount of more wealthy enthusiasts would be able to afford or undertake. So, what words of advice would you give to our community that, care deeply about originality and their car's historical significance, but that may not have the means or resources to approach restoration or maintenance at this level?
Well, first of all, I think that there can be a misapprehension that says that the archaeological approach is more costly and can only be done by experts somewhere and should only be done on really valuable cars. The archaeological automobile is really any automobile treated in this way, that is, in which you use the archaeological mindset to try and understand the background of that particular car. And my book is about sensitizing the collector to important aspects of his car's materiality, and that's a mindset that absolutely anybody can bring to any car, so that you can do an archaeological restoration on your Ford Pinto, you can do it on your Porsche 911, you can do it on any car you really want, because it's the important thing is that it's an approach that you can do yourself. And I'm hoping that readers will read my book and take it out to the garage and actually spend time with the book and their car and go through it and begin to identify these archaeological points that are the things that make their car the individual that it is.
Another really interesting part of this whole conversation is the men and women that actually have the skills to do all this stuff. In your book, you talk about kind of the broader loss of craftsman skills in all sorts of kind of antiquarian techniques. And what that means for the hobby. We seem to keep getting closer to a day when all these cars are still around, but there may only be a handful of people that have the skills or technology or access to tools and technology to work on them. This relates to very old cars, right? Building a Kotal gearbox all the way up to a brand new supercar whose computers may be tough to replace or reboot or remap in the future. You are a supporter of all sorts of programs that seek to keep that going. But what are kind of your broader thoughts on the craft and where that's going in the next 20, 30 years?
Well, I think there's some pretty good efforts out there at this point that recognizes that there's a need to develop a whole new generation of skilled craftsmen who can deal with these obsolescent and vanishing technologies. These more esoteric techniques to deal with things like low tension magnetos, coach painting, brush painting cars, and things of this nature. I would imagine that what we really need to do is not just graduate another generation of workmen, of craftsmen, but at the same time, what we need is what I call mid-career training, and that is to offer short-term focused programs to teach skills in some of these more esoteric areas to accomplished and seasoned and skilled technicians who want to expand their skill set. And I think this would be one of the fastest and best ways to move the needle is literally have opportunities for skilled people to come in and develop an intensive course for them in a particular area that then they can go apply in the real world. The problem is one that's only going to get worse. But I'm hopeful that as the value of cars, the historical value of cars, gets greater, and that as people become more aware of the importance of trying to do things the way they were done, that the desire to preserve these skills will grow.
That's very interesting. The Bring a Trailer platform at the end of the day is really all about knowledge sharing and discovery, and really connoisseurship. I think in terms of understanding really the finer points of what makes a car original or what its history may have been, and understanding, why fine details make such a big difference in authenticity, in value, and a number of other things. You talk a lot about the difference between collecting and connoisseurship in your book. Would you kindly explain kind of that broader theme to our audience and your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think that the way I describe connoisseurship is would first be in opposition to the word hobby. Okay, hobbies are about activities that are for the benefit of the hobbyist. And what a hobbyist does is a hobbyist maximizes his or her pleasure through the use of materials, products, objects, et cetera, et cetera. Connoisseur, on the other hand, is somebody who puts the importance of the object to the fore. In other words, the importance of the integrity of the automobile is more important than the personal wishes and desires of the owner. Connoisseurship is about understanding that very small changes in configuration, in condition, in history of a automobile can lead to very large differences in historical value and monetary value, in aesthetic value, in just the way an automobile presents. So I think a lot of this boils down to understanding the nuances of what gives a car its historical character, and then through the archaeological mindset, trying to bring that to the fore. And that, to me, is the height of connoisseurship.
Very good. On Bring a Trailer every day, the kind of headline attention goes to the selling amounts that all these vehicles bring at auction. But value really has two meanings. One, of course, is the monetary price, which I think people can easily grab their attention. But the second is value as more of a historic, cultural, and personal importance. And this is something I know you have a lot of insights on. In your book, you illustrate with examples like a James Bond Aston Martin DB5 compared to your 1933 MG PA. We've sold a few PAs on BAT over the years.
Yeah.
And I think maybe also a Ford Maverick. Ford Maverick was in there. Talk about those examples and what you were illustrating as it relates to how people think about value.
Well, yeah, first of all, value does not just have to be monetary. There are many, many ways that we value things. We have historic value, we have age value, we have functional value, we have aesthetic value, we have personal value, and so on and so on. And each of those categories can probably be subdivided. So something like the James Bond Goldfinger car has historical value, as well as probably sentimental value to devotees of the James Bond movies. And that's because the car was an important character in the popular James Bond films. By contrast, my family's MGPA PB, a 1933 special bodied car, is important to me and the other members of my family for its personal value. It's a reminder of my father. It's a reminder of our family's heritage in motorsport and automobiles. And that personal value is attributable only to me, irrespective of its historical, cultural, or other values. And it certainly does have some of those values as well. And then by contrast, the Ford Maverick that we just talked about, is another automobile that would have historical value, certainly, but one with no monetary value. And so the point is that you can have a car of enormous historical value. I'm not saying that that's a Ford Maverick. Let's say it's a Model T that commands no monetary value. And and sometimes that's mediated by rarity, and sometimes it's not. And one thing that's worth thinking about when it comes to rarity is that rarity is not a value creator, because many uncommon things have no value. And so to go back to our example of a Maverick, a wholly original and genuine Ford Maverick would be one of those rare things. I think we would admit that an absolutely spotless, essentially pristine and unused Ford Maverick would be a very rare automobile indeed. It has no value because there's no demand for it. And so for something to be intrinsically desirable is the requirement before rarity begins to have any role in supercharging value. So when we talk about important rare cars, they're cars that are desirable to people that happen to exist in a small number, and therefore with the forces of supply and demand at work, they command major prices. But as I say, many valuable things, not monetarily valuable, but many valuable things command no monetary value, and that's worthy of being aware of.
Certainly. In college, I was actually a history major, and really at the end of the day, you are a really devoted historian. I've heard you talk in the past about you could argue that the automobile may be the most significant item in modern history, and how it's impacted so many things. I know that's a loaded question, but would you mind talking about kind of your thoughts on the automobile in general and its impact on modern history?
Well, sure. I mean, look, the automobile is arguably one of the most important technological objects of the 20th century, and it hasn't shown any signs of going away. So I would say it's still a very important technological object of the 21st century, and I think it is unquestionably one of the most important legacy artifacts of modern material culture that basically represents what Western industrialized culture is all about. The automobile basically transformed the world, and it did it through its sociological effects, its economic effects, the way it changed the landscape, the way it changed the roles and mores of society, the way it homogenized our country. Think about the emergence of major chain restaurants, hotels, and other chain purveyors that are the same from Washington State to Maine. These are all things that are largely based on the effects of the automobile. And certainly if we think through the most awful geopolitical conflicts of World War I, World War II, the Gulf Wars, so on and so on, these are all conflicts that were caused by the quest for resources to support an industrialized economies in various parts of the world that was built around auto mobility. So, the car is really at the center of all of these amazing transformative changes. And again, whether it's minor things or major things like organized labor or universal suffrage, these things were all hugely influenced by the automobile. So it's a change agent, the likes of which we have rarely seen. Indeed, with modern technology being what it is, we are facing the advent of some other equally tremendous change agents. And the one virtue that the automobile has is it got here early. It got here 100 years before some of these other change agents. And so the automobile becomes a paradigm. It becomes a model for us to look at and to think about when we assess something like our transformation of our world to a digital social media world and the effects, both positive and negative, that's had, or on genetic engineering, or on artificial intelligence, or on robotics. All of these things offer the opportunity, as the automobile has, to transform our world. And like the automobile, and like all powerful technologies, to not only influence the world for good, but to influence the world for evil, for bad. Because all bright lights cast dark shadows, and the automobile has cast its share of dark shadows in our world. And so will AI and genetic engineering, and we're seeing it with social media. These are not 100% unalloyed benefits.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. I want to go back to your background a little bit. Your dad raced at Le Mans in 1939, if I have that right.
That's correct.
There is a wonderful photo in your book that I hope that we can post for our audience, which is you heading out of a dirt paddock at an SCCA regional race in 1971 in your Porsche Speedster, and it looks like you're pulling out onto the track behind what is that, a Volvo 142, maybe a Triumph TR3. Were you an aspiring
and an Elva Courier?
That's right.
And,
that's right.
Yeah, some other stuff. Yeah. So I'm sure that the more gimlet-eyed in the audience there will immediately count off all the cars ahead of me and try and figure out where I qualified. But yeah, I was like, what the heck? It was fun times.
Very good. And I know you've hung up your racing suit and helmet these days. And your dad was somewhat of a gentleman racer. Was he what you would consider a professional driver back then, or that was more of a hobby thing for him?
Well, the sports car racing back in the early 50s, the late 1940s and early 1950s, was very much an amateur activity. In fact, if you're an historian of early SCCA club activities, you know that there were basically two political forces, if you want to look at it that way. Those that maintain that the SCCA should always be a venue for pure amateur drivers to compete. And then the other group, under the leadership of people like Alec Ullman, who maintained that road racing in the United States should allow for professional activities. And my dad was on the professional activities side of things, though he was, an amateur driver. He just read the tea leaves and said that this was a sport that would benefit by bringing professionals in and having professional series and so on. And, indeed, the year that he passed away in 1954, he had made arrangements to acquire and drive a Grand Prix car in European Grand Prix races. So he was definitely going to jump in the pool on the deep end of sort of the professional level at that time.
I mean, it's fascinating. He ran in that period when motor racing was truly a dangerous sport, and people make the reference to gladiators when you talk about certainly Vanderbilt Cup era, but certainly through the 30s and 40s. So I can only imagine that he was an adventure and a thrill seeker. I think you'd have to be.
And he was fortunately, at least according to the literature I've read, he was a very capable driver and could give a good account of himself. But the thing about any period is we are products of our time, and so things that we look at in history and say those people were out of their minds, that was so insanely dangerous, I can't imagine that, why you do it, to people in the period that was how it was, and nothing exceptional about it.
Yeah, and connecting that to racing today, I mean, I have to say, Miles, you, as you know, are one of the few people left that are still bringing really the best cars, the thoroughbreds of the period that are still the best in class in vintage racing today out. Oftentimes you bring multiple cars to a single event, Porsche 904s, 906s, your Alpha TZ. What do you think about the fact that there are fewer and fewer people that are still campaigning these best of era type cars today?
Well, what we're seeing essentially, Howard, is the normal working out of a field of connoisseurship, a field of collectibles, in which over time the value, in this case, I'm talking about monetary value of automobiles of a particular type and desirability, because of their rarity, are becoming so valuable that people are loath to risk them anymore. And the problem is that, as I spend a great deal of time in my book commenting, is that we are subjecting these things to high risk and a high wear and tear environment. And people don't want to do that with cars that command these kinds of values anymore. So we're experiencing a little bit of an automotive Gresham's law, in which less valuable cars drive out the more valuable cars. And this is a long-term problem. We can certainly argue that the world doesn't necessarily need 10 absolutely perfect lightweight E-types to serve as important legacy artifacts 100 years from now. But at the same time, I think if we race every one of them until we roll them all in a ball, we've also lost something. Now, luckily, what's happening is that people who are inclined towards historic preservation are beginning to acquire the most original cars and maintain them. But then the other side of the coin, flips up, and that is, but then we don't, because these cars are being maintained, that may make us feel good, but we don't get to see them run at racetracks. And so one of my hypotheses is that, doesn't it make sense in applications that are high risk, high wear, such as vintage racing, that in fact we create and allow to be created stunt doubles for the racing? And the issue is, wow, doesn't that depreciate the value of good cars? Well, I don't know that it does. I mean, obviously, if you create 100 examples of something, this is a problem. I think we would all agree with that. With, say, the poster boy for that is our Cobra automobiles, which point you can pretty well take it to the bank that if you see one on the road, it's a replica. But my view is, if you had an homologation process of some kind that permitted only a limited number of reproduction automobiles that were acknowledged and used as reproductions, and you were allowed to race them, I don't know that anything bad would happen. In fact, I think that the quality of motor racing would go up. I think the audience would enjoy it more. And my example of that would basically be the Goodwood events, and where, while no one really likes to talk about it, there are a large number of replica cars in those fields, and nobody knows and nobody really cares. I do think that I've actually been writing some pieces on this. I'm still trying to formulate my thinking in more detail about what we do to make sure that important and significant cars are still recognized for what they are, important original works of art and of human effort that need to be saved and revered over the years, and not diluted by a huge flow of replicas. Nevertheless, there is a place for replicas in this field. And again, I think a lot of that comes from the idea of the archaeological mindset. The great original cars, if they haven't been turned into archetypes by some improvident anonymizing restoration, still show signs of their use and age and everything about them. And we can see that's tangible and perceptible. And it makes those cars completely different from what a modern replica would look like.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Before we wrap up, I want to touch a little bit on your collection. People may or may not know that Revs in the Collier collection is probably one of, if not the best collection in the world. I wouldn't just be saying that just because I'm sitting talking to you.
You're not sparing my blushes, that's for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that in 1986 you bought the Briggs Cunningham collection. Are a meaningful amount of cars in the collection from Briggs today? Give us kind of an overview of
something. Yeah, something less than half of the cars in the collection are from the Briggs Cunningham collection. I believe 50 cars. We have 115 cars in the collection. 50 of them are Briggs Cunningham cars. And one of the obligations that I felt once I had acquired Briggs's collection was that any cars I added to the collection had to stand up against Briggs's cars. And some of the greatest cars in our collection, some of the greatest cars in the world, absolutes, full stop, are cars from the Briggs Cunningham collection. And so when I've added cars in various types and styles, I have felt the obligation to make sure that these cars also equal what Briggs had. So, I was fortunate enough to be able to acquire a W154 Mercedes-Benz Grand Prix car. I think that holds up very nicely to Briggs's Grand Prix car collection. And we have a completely unrestored and original 917K Martini factory car. So part of the challenge and the enjoyment of this collection has been maintaining its quality as it grows.
No, it's a fascinating place to visit. I would recommend, certainly if you're in the state of Florida, you ought to get down to Naples. And even if you're coming from farther afield, it is truly an experience. Is it open to the public? Is it by appointment, or tell us about that?
The collection is open 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And you can make a reservation by going on the web and going to our website, Revs Institute, and a couple of clicks, and you have a reservation to come visit us. We're open from 10 to 4 on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays all year round.
Terrific. We will link to that. Lastly, I really cannot recommend this book, The Archaeological Automobile, enough, mostly because there is really nothing else like this out there. I appreciate, Miles, that you think about all this stuff in super innovative and truly unique ways. The word unique is oft overused, but in this case, I think very appropriate. Is this book, are you making many copies? If our listeners want to get their hands on it, how would they do that?
The book is readily available. You can buy it on Amazon without any problem, or you can buy it on Collier Auto Media. Just go to Collier Auto Media website and click on that, and you can buy the book there. Or the book should be in various museum bookstores as well as neighborhood bookstores around the country.
Very good. And I'll just say for people listening, if you like reading about people's comments on BAT on various auction listings in the comments section, Miles' book takes that to about and times it by about 100. So if you're into the knowledge sharing and discovery that we see every day on Bring a Trailer, I promise you you will sit down with this book over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and really thoroughly enjoy it. So Miles, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. I'm one of your biggest fans, and I hope that our paths will cross again soon.
I look forward to it indeed, Howard. We'll see you out at the racetrack this summer, I hope.